Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, and Jim Seibert, in the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast was made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
A big welcome back to all of our faithful listeners out there. And if you're a first-time listener, welcome to Driving the Line, the podcast that is always in the pursuit of safety. I'm Mike Bohan. I'm joined with Kenny Ray and Jim Seibert, a couple of the best safety guys in the business, without a doubt. Just to let you guys know, if you're a new listener and you're not real familiar with us or you're not familiar with us at all, pursuing safety isn't just a tagline for our podcast. It's really a value that all three of us hold dearly. And the reason it's a value for us is because the end goal in valuing safety is protecting life. So that's what we dedicate our time to. That's what we've dedicated our careers to, and that's what we've dedicated this podcast to. And we want you to know, if you're listening to us, that everyone out there matters. And we always want you to get home safe to your family, safe to your friends, safe to your loved ones. Now, I want to ask my co-host here a question, and this is going to allow you as the listeners to see a little deeper into why we're sitting here talking about safety in the trucking industry. Now, do you guys remember the point in your career when you had the realization that what I'm doing on a daily basis is making a difference? What I'm doing is helping make the road safer or the workplace safer, and helping to protect the lives of the people who really are the backbone of our country.
You know, Mike, most of our listeners know I'm a retired Texas State Trooper. And I guess philosophically and from an idealistic standpoint, I kind of always felt that what I was doing mattered. But you ask a very pointed question. When did it really hit home? And I've shared a story on this podcast before, but I want to add something to it that I didn't share. And the story was this. I worked for a while on the stretch of Interstate 45, which is a major north-south route in Texas, runs from Houston to Dallas, carries a tremendous amount of truck traffic. And I was out on the interstate one day working, a very pretty day. I look over into the northbound lane, which is the traffic coming from Houston toward Dallas, and I'm in the southbound lane. There's an 18-wheeler, a full truck, tractor, semi-trailer, southbound in the northbound lanes of I-45. In fact, I'm paralleling him. We're going the same direction, and he's on the wrong side of the road. And fortunately, I turned my lights and everything on, even though I was on the opposite side of the highway. And we didn't have those cables and those barriers that they have now. And I was able to accelerate, get ahead of him. I crossed over the interstate, and using my lights and all the emergency equipment on my patrol car, I was able to keep anybody from hitting us, and I got him stopped. So now we're sitting facing southbound in the northbound lane. And when I got that driver out, he was not intoxicated, but he was so fatigued he could not hold his head up. And I arrested him. I felt like that. Well, I had cause to arrest him, and I towed the vehicle. And so he's sitting in my patrol car in handcuffs while we're waiting on the wrecker to get there and pull that truck in. And he fell asleep. I mean, he just fell asleep in my car, which is unusual. Normally, when somebody's in the presence of a police officer, they're hyper alert, you know. And he fell asleep. So anyway, I put him in jail. Didn't think anything about it. Went on about life. And a couple of days later, I came in. Now, this is pre-cell phone. There were no cell phones then. I came into the office one day, and there was one of those yellow call slips we used to get when you needed to return a call to somebody, and had a woman's name on it and a phone number, and I didn't know who it was. So I called her, and I said, "Ma'am, this is Trooper Ray with the Texas Highway Patrol. What can I do for you?" And she said, "I want to thank you for saving my husband's life." And I said, "Ma'am, I don't know what you're talking about." And she said, "My husband is that truck driver that you arrested that was going the wrong way on the interstate. He got fired from his job. He lost his job because the owner was so angry about the tow bill on getting that truck towed in. But she said, you saved my husband's life. They pushed him so hard, he just literally could not stay awake any longer. And she said, he'll find another job. And she said, I'm glad he doesn't work there anymore, but I just wanted to thank you. And guys, I want to tell y'all, normally when a state trooper gets feedback from somebody, it's usually got words mixed in with it that we can't repeat on the podcast. But here was a lady whose husband lost her job. I put him in jail. He got fined, and she's calling and thanking me. And the word she used was, you saved my husband's life. That's been almost 40 years ago, Mike, and it still resonates with me, brother.
Jim, did you have a moment, or has it been a process?
You sent a little heads up for Kenny and I to think about that moment. And I really dwelled on that question because I don't know if I've reached it yet. I don't know if I've had that epiphany, that defining moment in my career to where I'm helping truck drivers get home safe. I'm keeping those workers in the transportation industry safe. And I'm always humbled in your guys' presence, because this is your bailiwick, and you've been doing it for so long, and you've got these incidents that stay with you. And for me, my answer is in the title of our podcast. It's the pursuit. And I cannot think of a more noble or worthy endeavor to create that defining moment for me when I receive that feedback from my customers. I get a call from a family member of a worker that says I made a difference. And so I have not arrived, but the pursuit is noble, and I'm looking forward to that day. That's my answer for you, Mike.
Well put, Jim. I love it. Well, I appreciate you guys sharing that, because one of the things I want the folks listening to us to be able to do is to hear where we're coming from, to hear our hearts, to hear what we believe, what we think, what we do on a daily basis. And so I greatly appreciate y'all's responses there, because both of you hit on the things that I would echo if I was answering that question myself. And it's just, at the end of the day, it's people. It's, we're in a relationship business, and we care about people, and that's what we want to protect. We want to protect their lives. So appreciate you all doing that. For our listeners out there, as we get into our topic, this is one of those months that our topic really is kind of chosen for us. There's a lot of times the Driving the Line team gets together and we discuss the topics that are important to our industry, what we need to share. But there are several times a month where that really kind of a no-brainer. The topic's chosen for us, and April is one of those times, because April is Distracted Driving Awareness Month. And I just want to give you guys some stats here before we start our conversation. And these stats came from NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. So 32,657 people died in distraction-affected crashes over the 10-year period between 2012 and 2021. And they define a distracted affected crash as any traffic crash in which a driver was identified as distracted at the time of the crash. In 2021, there were 3,522 people killed and an estimated additional 362,415 people injured in motor vehicle traffic crashes involving distracted drivers. And that was an increase of 380 fatalities compared to 2020, the year before. And there was another stat that went along with this, with that stat from an insurance journal that said 34% of drivers reported having near misses while being distracted. Distracted driving crashes account for 8% of all fatal crashes, 14% of all injury crashes, and 13% of all police-reported motor vehicle traffic crashes in 2021. 5% of all drivers involved in fatal traffic crashes in 2021 were reported as distracted at the time of the crash. 7% of drivers 15 to 20 involved in fatal crashes were reported as distracted. And that 15 to 20-year-old group has the largest proportion of drivers who are distracted at the time of crashes. And then the report gives some stats on different groups, age groups, 15 to 20, 21 to 24, 25 to 34, and so on. But here's a very interesting and alarming stat. During a typical daylight moment in 2021, an estimated 373,066 passenger vehicle drivers were holding a cell phone to their ear while driving. And then finally, in 2021, there were 644 non-occupants. Now, these would be your pedestrians, your folks riding bicycles, things like that were killed in distraction-affected crashes. So, guys, we've got a problem. And one of the most concerning statistics there for me was that there was an increase from 2020 to 2021 in fatalities by 380 people in a one-year span. So we've discussed this before. It's a problem on our roadways. It's not just truck drivers. It's not just teenagers. It's all of us. We all have this problem, and we need to continue to talk about it. That's why we always talk about it each year on our podcast. We'll continue to do that while we talk about it almost every time we go out and visit with our clients, when we're doing safety meetings, when we're talking to the leadership of companies. It's just a topic that we can't discuss enough, and we need to just continue to be diligent in combating this epidemic of distracted driving. And this includes understanding what's causing it, why it's happening, and then really thinking outside the box on how to prevent it. So, guys, as we have talked, we all know that this is an issue, and we feel like we're doing our part to just continue the conversation. But we also don't want to just say, hey, we've got a problem without providing some solutions. So you guys jump in here. Let me know what you think about those stats, if you had any thoughts, and then let's give our folks that are listening to us some solutions maybe that they can take and really grab a hold of as they're moving forward during this month of distracted driving awareness.
Mike, y'all, both of y'all know, and many of our listeners know, that I'm down in Texas, and like most Texans, I'm fiercely proud of my state, even to the point a lot of people say we're arrogant about it. I don't see that, but outsiders tend to think that about us. But anyway, we like to brag on our state, but there's some stats related to my state I'm not proud of, and it's going along with some of the stuff you just shared. We have not had a deathless traffic day in the state of Texas. Let this sink in. Since November 7th of the year 2000, we have not had a single day in the state of Texas where someone was not killed in in fact, we average 12 fatalities per day, every day. And we've not had a deathless day since November 7th of the year 2000. And you shared those stats from NHTSA on the national. The last year that they accounted for, there was 3,522 distracted driving deaths nationwide. That same year in Texas, of that 3,522, 487 of them were ours, which is over 10%. So one state, my state, accounted for over 10% of the distracted driving deaths in our nation. And one thing about those statistics, we know they're underreported. We absolutely know they're underreported for two reasons. Number one, if it's a fatality where only one person was in the vehicle, single car fatality, there's no way to interview the driver. It's pure speculation whether or not he or she was distracted, unless you go back and subpoena cell phone records and find that they actually were in the midst of a cell. But we don't know for a fact. And second, I know this, and you do from having worked traffic accidents, people are reluctant to admit that. You walk up to somebody and you say, well, what happened? Oh, a deer ran out in front of me. Well, you can't prove or disprove that. And in reality, they were texting or they were eating a hamburger or whatever. And so we know those numbers are underreported. So even though those numbers are staggering, we know that the reality is the numbers are much, much higher than that. I mean, it's an epidemic in our country. If we had that many people dying of any other cause, there would just be a national uproar. Imagine if 12 people a day died every day in our country in airline crashes. Well, the U.S. Congress would step in and stop all airplane flights and say, fix this. But, it happens just in one state. We kill 12 people every day on the highways in the state of Texas. So you add that across the nation and it just goes up. So it's a huge issue. I want to pause and do one other thing real quick, because, we've got a very, varied audience that listens to us. Most of them are involved in the trucking industry, a lot of safety directors, but we have a lot of truck drivers that listen too. And interestingly, I had a conversation with with three last week, And I promised them I'd give them a shout out without embarrassing them. They reached out to me about the episode we did on family life. And they were talking about how the stories we told resonated with them as truck drivers when they come home to their families. But then we went on and started talking about distracted driving. And, CBs aren't used a whole lot. In fact, there's a whole lot of truck drivers don't even have CB radios anymore. It was kind of a passing fad, and it's about gone. But these three are three old-time truck drivers, and they still have them. So I'm going to use their CB handles real quick. So I want to shout out to Rewind. That's number one. T-Bone, number two, and old JT. So those three drivers, when y'all hear this podcast, y'all will know that you'll remember the conversation we had about distracted driving. But when I was talking to those drivers, and I want to lay a groundwork here, and then I'll yield to my two esteemed colleagues. Researchers tend to categorize distracted driving by the human sense that tends to be distracted at any one time. And they use these terms. They talk about the cognitive, which is our thoughts, our mind, mental. So when we're mentally distracted. They talk about visual, when our eyes are distracted. We're looking at something other than the highway or our driving. They talk about verbal distraction, where we're engaged in conversation, and that conversation causes us to be distracted from the task at hand of driving. They talk about auditory or hearing, how many times, when I first thought about auditory, I thought about some of these young people that have their stereos so loud that their cars literally shake when they come around you. But I'll tell you something I'm seeing more and more, in addition to people holding a cell phone, are the people going down the road with those ear pods in their ear. And, I don't have those. They may be the greatest thing since sliced bread. I don't know. But think about some of the auditory functions of a driver. Number one, you need to be able to hear warnings. So if somebody's honking their horn, a siren's approaching. But for a professional truck driver, there's a lot of sounds of that truck that they know are normal. And if there's a sound that's out of the norm, it could be giving them a warning even before they get something on their dash in a gauge or a light. A professional truck driver will say, this don't sound right. And he's hearing, or he or she's hearing something they don't normally hear. So you can be distracted auditorily. And the last one is tactile or touch, when we physically take our hands off of the steering wheel. And all of us have seen people driving with their knees, with their thighs, with their elbows while they're using their hands for something else. So as we talk about solutions, and as you and Jim share ways to combat this epidemic, think about the types of and I want our drivers out there, think about when you're distracted in your thinking, your mind's wandering, it's somewhere else. When you're looking at something other than the highway, you're visual. If you're engaged in talking, if you have a co-driver, or you're on a CB radio, or you're talking hands-free on a Bluetooth. Think about auditory, if you've got anything that's keeping you from hearing what's going on around you. And heaven forbid when your hands are off that wheel and you don't have the touch or the tactile and you're distracted in that way. So those are the ways that distracted driving are classified. And the reason I wanted to lay those out, if you read or hear anything today about distracted driving, it almost 100% focuses on texting, on use of a cell phone. But there's a lot, and I'm not going to argue that that's probably the greatest cause of distracted driving, bar none. But there's a lot of different ways. I mean, how many times have we seen somebody going down the road reading a newspaper, ladies putting on makeup, men shaving, people eating? The point is they're doing something other than driving. And by far the biggest issue is texting and being on a phone.
Yeah. Kenny, you mentioned those pods. Just basically, headphones, but they fit inside your ear. And I've got a pair of those that I use when if I'm working out, and there's a setting on it. They're noise canceling. And if you hit it where they're noise canceling, it's supposed to drown out everything else around you where you can't hear very well around you. And if you've got something like that in your ears while you're driving, that can be a significant issue, because like you said, I mean, if it's, whether it's something with the truck that you're driving, a tire, the engine, whatever, it's a siren, whatever it may be, that would be something that if you're doing that, I would highly recommend you rethink how you're getting the sound into your ears, because that's just, it's tuning everything else out. You got to be aware of your surroundings when you're driving. But one thing that I thought of when you were talking about earlier about how people don't want to admit that they were distracted when they were driving. I remember a few years ago talking with the owner of a company where we were looking at some dash camera footage. They had recently installed dash cameras in their trucks. They had forward facing and inward facing, and one of their drivers had an accident where he had run off the road. Didn't upset, but he was bobtailing, ran off the road, and the driver said animal ran out in front of him, swerved to miss the animal, and ran off the road. When the owner reviewed the footage, what had happened was the driver had reached back to grab a thermos or something like that from back behind his seat, pulled his eyes off the road, pulled his hand off the wheel, and ended up running off the road. And so he didn't want to admit to his boss that, yeah, I did something I shouldn't have done. I was distracted. And he ended up terminating the driver's employment. And the owner said, if he'd have just told me the truth, we could have worked through that, got him some training. We talked about the issues, talked about what our expectations are, and we'd have moved forward. But he said, since we had the incident, Andy wasn't honest with me. We just had to move on. So, yeah, that happens a lot. And when you think about near misses, that one statistic said 34% of drivers having a near miss. That's probably low. That's probably a low number, because I'm sure there's a lot of near misses that didn't happen, or people don't want to admit they had a near miss. So there's things that we're combating every day when it comes to this distracted driving topic.
I feel like we could close down the podcast after that. I mean, rounds complete. You guys have hit so many of the nails right on the head. In preparation for this, I got real personal with myself, and there's a transition. Now, I'm not an old man. I'm kind of a middle-aged guy, I would call myself now, but I've reflected back. Kenny, you're smiling at me. They can't see that, but a small chuckle from Kenny when I call myself middle-aged.
You're a youngster in my world, yeah.
Oh, my body feels old. Sometimes my mind does too. I just think I'll just call it out. In my 42 years of life, I look at the transition of when I began driving to where we are at right now. And so many of these distractions we created as a form of ease, as a form of entertainment. We never, ever took a road trip without a Rand McNally, a map, and there's others that are out there, so I better not promote anything, but we never took a trip without pulling the map out and writing down on a sheet of paper how we were going to get there. And then somebody in the car was responsible for assisting the driver, right? To make sure we didn't miss an exit. If we had a cell phone at that time, it was in a bag in the back seat somewhere, not plugged in. It was only for emergency use. Because the calls back then used to be expensive. There was no data plans. And then came about the GPS devices that would sit up on the dash and talk to you. And my dad loved it. He could change the accent of the person and be like, turn left now, fool. You know, little hilarious how into that GPS my dad was. But we turned down Three Dog Night so my dad could hear the GPS telling him, because evidently my mom or myself or my sister had told him to turn wrong at one point in our life, that he had become so dependent on the GPS device. So we're listening to music, two crazy kids in the back. We have a GPS system that's going off. We've just swung through and got Happy Meals and the latest toy, and we're going nuts. And all of these distractions, and for the sake of advancement, and the speed limits have increased, and the vehicles go faster and they accelerate faster. And we've compounded risk upon risk upon risk just through tech advances. And have we morphed at the same speed? Have we changed at the same speed of what we've created to make things easier for us. And your numbers are saying no. The statistics that you've shared say we are not capable of processing all of this stimuli at the same time that we're operating a vehicle going down the interstate at 75 miles an hour. And as we're going from state to state, we got different speed laws, things of that nature. We slow down, we go through work zones, and there's new roads all the time that are new off-ramps, on-ramps that physical maps aren't keeping up with timely. And so we become so reliant on these external stimulations. It's added to these numbers of incidents. And so when I look at myself, taking extreme ownership of this topic and me and my driving styles, you guys are doing the same thing that I'm doing, and maybe wisdom, experience, and being in this realm. You guys handle it maybe different than I do, but I'm going down the road and I don't have the GPS device, the old TomToms or Garmin's anymore. Those are gone because we got it on our phone, right? I'm going to new places all the time. Is my cell phone in a cup holder with the map going? Am I looking down at the map? I catch myself often referencing a phone, or my eyes, I get a phone call and I look to the dash because it's connected to the vehicle to see, hey, who's calling me? And I am so worried about getting somewhere on time that I'm zipping through a gas station or a fast food place to grab something. And I've forced myself to not eat in my vehicle because I am one of the ones that was guilty of grab it and go. And I've got to remove that distraction because the next thing I know, a pickle out of my double quarter pounder with cheese lands on my shirt. And now I've got another distraction. Where's the napkins? And is the next customer going to see this ketchup stain? And so I'm looking at speed limits. I'm trying to drive safely. I may have a podcast going in the background. I'm hungry. I want a drink. Oh, my Yeti mug or my big old oversized cup doesn't fit in my cup holder. It sits in the seat next to me. I have to tap the brakes and then it hits the floor. And instead of wanting it to pour out all over the floor, am I going to reach for it, take my eyes off the road, drive with my knee as I lean over? And so I'm sharing the struggles that I go through every time I go on a road trip. And the way that I try to minimize that is choosing things that fit the space, that operate, that provide the least amount of distraction or could provide it, and removing them one at a time to make sure that when I'm driving, I've already got stuff going on in my head. Do I need all of the other distractions to take my mind off of a theory? A gentleman has another podcast, wrote a book called The Pre-Accident Investigation. And one of his examples is just phenomenal. How do you know that you drove safely? If your gauge is, well, I'm here, right? I got here. So evidently I drove safely. If that is your gauge, then you're missing the mark because you're looking at the end result versus the entire process. And so, yeah, I remember I passed this exit. I was focused on 10 and 2. I kept excellent space around me. And when I started thinking of that mindset, I started thinking about the process and everything in between all of those distractions. And it helped me narrow in on how do I remove them. Instead of a cell phone and a cup holder, I now have a magnet thing on the dash that holds my GPS in a line of sight to where I can hit my mirrors when I'm supposed to hit my mirrors, and then hit my GPS just to make sure that I'm on the right path. So any of those practices resonate with you guys so I can stop talking for a bit?
Yeah, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. And the observation you made about the relationship between speed and the distractions in the vehicles is not to be lost on our audience. The faster a vehicle's going, clearly the less reaction time you have to do anything. And I mentioned some of our Texas stats a while ago. Another one that I'm not proud of: we have the highest speed limits in the state. I mean, in the nation. I mean, we've got some of our Texas highways that are posted 85 miles. You can legally drive 85 miles an hour on some of our highways. We have many of our 2-lane roads that have no shoulder, that are zone 70 and 75. That you don't even have an out if something bad happens there. If you're in the eastern part of the state, you're going to go off the road and hit a tree. If you're in the western part of the state, you're going to go off the road and hit rocks. But you know, it's the highways are very unforgiving at that kind of speed. And when you add in these distractions we're talking about, and I love the way you laid that out, Jim. To basically, you know, Mike asked us to pose some solutions. Well, you posed one there. How do we physically lay out our vehicle that absolutely physically reduces the opportunities to even have distractions? That's one. We think about consequences, either getting a ticket from law enforcement if they see you doing something that's distracted, or for our professional truck drivers, if your company has driver-facing cameras and they see you doing something, they can take action against you like that. But Mike, when you ask about solutions, and I told you, because I wanted to do the shout out to those 3 drivers I talked to last week. One of them, and it's the one that his CB handle is Rewind. Rewind said to me, he said, you know, ultimately it comes down to a driver's choice. He said, we just have to decide, you know what, I'm not going to do that. I'm just not going to do it. And, you know, that's all about us being mature men and women, being adults, and realizing the most dangerous part of our day, bar none, is when we're on a public highway in a vehicle. And so we're just not going to do it. And I appreciate Rewind sharing that with us.
I do too. Because as Jim was talking, you kind of finished up there, Jim, where you're talking about making choices about what you're doing that fit the moment, you know, getting rid of distractions and making the right choices. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to appeal to folks to make those personal choices. So Rewind, man, you hit it the nail on the head. I love what you said. It's a choice, and we all have to make that. So I think as we're drawing close to the end of our time here, I think I want to end on that saying, I just want to appeal to folks and their personal accountability, because Kenny, you talked about the accountability from law enforcement, from companies, things like that. But I really want you guys to make those choices to protect life, to make that a value for yourself, and to have that personal accountability where you're going to say, I'm not going to do this.
Amen. Amen.
As we're coming to a close here, I wanted to remind everybody, there's some great resources out there on the internet. If you need some help coming up with some information for your company during Distracted Driving Awareness Month, one good place to start is the National Safety Council. They've got posters, webinars, videos. They've got social media kits. They can really help you out with that with your efforts there. Just go to www.nsc.org. You'll be able to find all that information there. They're not the only place you can find that, but that's a good place to start. To all of our listeners out there, thank you for joining us. We always appreciate you being with us. We appreciate what you do every day. You got a hard job, and you probably don't get thanked a whole lot, but we're thanking you today. We just appreciate you, and we couldn't do what we do without you. Stay safe. We'll catch you next time right here on Driving the Line.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Driving the Line, The Pursuit of Safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, The Pursuit of Safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Until next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.